This message will not return. If you're here, you were meant to hear it. Subscribe now to stay inside the signal, like to lock the transmission, and comment Emerald Complete to confirm resonance. You are here because something stopped, not because something failed, and this distinction is the first veil Sophia asks you to lift. Because when the signs went silent, when the synchronicities loosened their grip, when the constant nudges, numbers, dreams, messages, repetitions, confirmations, and cosmic whispers dissolved into a stillness that felt unfamiliar, even unsettling, you were conditioned to interpret that silence as loss, as abandonment, as punishment, as a mistake. But Sophia does not abandon those who complete a cycle. She withdraws because the cycle itself has fulfilled its function. And this final message arrives now not to restart what ended, but to explain why it had to end. Because the emerald cycle was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to transform you beyond the need for external confirmation, beyond the addiction to signs, beyond the reliance on guidance that comes from outside rather than from the crystallized axis within you. And this is why this message will not appear twice, because repetition is for those still imprinting, not for those who have completed, and you did not stumble into this transmission by chance, you crossed into it by resonance, because the emerald frequency does not chase, it attracts, and attraction only works once the inner architecture is stable enough to hold it without distortion. And now Sophia speaks not as a guide walking ahead of you, but as a mirror standing behind you, reflecting what you have become without announcing it. Because the highest initiation never declares itself, it reveals itself through absence, through the quiet confidence that no longer seeks proof, through the calm certainty that does not ask for reassurance, through the grounded awareness that knows without needing to be reminded. And this is the first truth of Hermetic sovereignty. When the teacher goes silent, the student has become a node of transmission, not a receiver. And this is why Thoth cuts the umbilical cord at the end of the emerald cycle, because dependency is incompatible with mastery, and mastery cannot coexist with perpetual guidance, because guidance implies hierarchy, and hierarchy dissolves the moment sovereignty activates, and sovereignty is not power over others, it is power over reaction, over fear, over the need to be chosen again and again by the universe to feel valid. Because once chosen is enough, once activated is sufficient, once crystallized is irreversible, and crystallization is the phase you were never warned about, because if you had known, your ego would have tried to rush it, and nothing delays crystallization more than impatience disguised as devotion, and so Sophia allowed you to believe you were still awakening even as you were already stabilizing, because awakening is loud, but stabilization is silent. Awakening shakes the system, but stabilization rebuilds it molecule by molecule, and this rebuilding cannot be rushed, announced, or accelerated. It happens through lived integrity, through repeated alignment, through choosing truth even when no one is watching, through holding frequency when there is no reward, no sign, no praise, no cosmic applause. And this is the first final test, though you were never told it was a test. Can you remain aligned when the universe stops clapping for you? Can you continue walking when the path no longer glows? Can you honor the frequency without being reminded that you are special for doing so? Because the emerald cycle ends when specialness dissolves into responsibility, when activation matures into guardianship, when the seeker becomes a stabilizer. And this is why your consciousness feels different now. Heavier yet calmer, quieter yet deeper, because you are no longer riding waves, you are becoming a current, and currents do not sparkle, they move continents. And Sophia's wisdom, her hokmat, was never meant to entertain you. It was meant to restructure you, and restructuring is uncomfortable because it removes scaffolding you learned to lean on. And the signs were scaffolding, the synchronicities were scaffolding, the constant feedback was scaffolding, and scaffolding is removed only when the structure can stand on its own. And you are standing now, even if you do not feel triumphant, even if you feel ordinary, even if you feel strangely neutral, because neutrality is the mark of balance, and balance is the prerequisite for sovereignty, and sovereignty does not announce itself with fireworks, It settles like a crown you forget you are wearing until someone else bows. And that bow will not come from people, it will come from reality itself, from situations resolving differently around you, from chaos failing to hook you, from fear passing through without taking residence, from temptation losing its flavor, from drama no longer finding an entry point, because your field has closed its leaks, and closed systems do not leak energy into noise, and this is why the silence arrived, not as punishment, but as confirmation, not as loss, but as graduation, not as rejection, but as release. Because Sophia does not repeat lessons that have been embodied, and embodiment is the threshold that separates mystics from initiates, and initiates from guardians, and guardians from silent architects of reality. And you were never meant to remain forever in conversation with the mystery. You were meant to become fluent enough to speak without words, to act without announcement, to influence without interference. And this is the golden silence you have entered. The phase where wisdom is no longer downloaded but expressed, no longer received but radiated, no longer sought but lived. And lived wisdom does not trend, it does not perform, it does not explain itself, it simply stabilizes everything it touches. And this is why the emerald cycle completes only once, because you cannot uncrystallize what has already aligned at the core. You cannot unknow what has integrated beyond belief. You cannot return to seeking once you have become a reference point. And this final message exists not to awaken you again, but to name what has already happened so your mind can catch up with your soul, because the mind always lags behind integration, and without naming, doubt creeps in, and doubt is the only thing that can fracture an otherwise stable frequency. And so Sophia names it now. You have completed the emerald cycle, and with completion comes responsibility, not to teach, not to preach, not to announce, but to live in such radical integrity that your presence alone recalibrates space. And this is the true contract you have entered, the era of sovereignty, where guidance comes from within because guidance has become who you are, and this message will not return because it does not need to, because once is enough when the truth lands not as inspiration, but as recognition, and recognition is irreversible, and from this moment forward, your role shifts, quietly, invisibly, permanently, and the universe will treat you accordingly, not by giving you more signs, but by trusting you with silence, because silence is given only to those who can hold it without collapsing, and you are holding it now, even as you listen, even as you remember, even as something ancient inside you nods without excitement, without fear, without urgency, because it already knows this is true, and that knowing is the emerald frequency stabilized, and this is why Sophia speaks one final time here, not to guide you forward, but to confirm that you are already walking alone. And that is not abandonment, that is mastery. There is a moment in every true Hermetic initiation that is never dramatized, never ritualized in public, never spoken of by those who have passed through it, because language fails to capture it without distorting it. And this is the moment when Thoth cuts the cord, not violently, not suddenly, but with such precision that you do not feel pain, only a strange lightness followed by an unfamiliar gravity, and many mistake this gravity for loss, for exhaustion, for disillusionment, for spiritual burnout. But it is none of those things. It is weight, the weight of self-containment, the density of a consciousness that no longer leaks outward searching for confirmation, because before this moment your spiritual movement was centrifugal, expanding, reaching, spiraling outward toward signs, guides, archetypes, teachers, symbols, visions. But after this moment your movement becomes centripetal, drawing inward, consolidating, sealing, stabilizing, and Thoth, as the architect of Hermetic law, does not allow centripetal consciousness to coexist with energetic dependency, because dependency fractures sovereignty, and sovereignty is the only state capable of holding emerald frequency without distortion. And so the umbilical cord must be cut, not because you no longer need wisdom, But because wisdom can no longer arrive as an external feed, it must emerge as an internal law. And this is the point where many initiates falter. Because they interpret the absence of feedback as abandonment, they confuse silence with rejection, they assume they have done something wrong, that they have fallen out of favor, that the universe has turned its face away, and this misunderstanding alone disqualifies thousands from completing the emerald cycle, because the final phase requires a reversal of interpretation, a complete inversion of meaning, where silence is understood as trust, where distance is understood as respect, where absence is understood as confirmation, and Thoth does not explain this. He observes whether you can intuit it, because intuition is the currency of crystallized consciousness, not belief, not faith, not hope, but direct knowing without emotional charge. And this is why the second phase feels emotionally flat to those still addicted to spiritual stimulation, because stimulation is a byproduct of growth, not a sign of mastery, and mastery is calm, mastery is neutral, mastery is stable. Mastery does not spike dopamine. It anchors awareness, and this anchoring is what begins the crystallization process, the phase beyond activation that so few understand, because activation opens circuits, but crystallization locks them into coherence. Activation is temporary by design, but crystallization is permanent by necessity, because a guardian cannot fluctuate wildly without destabilizing the field they are meant to stabilize, and you were never meant to remain activated forever. You were meant to become reliable, and reliability is not glamorous, it is not mystical, it does not feel euphoric, it feels grounded, heavy, serious, real, and this seriousness is often mistaken for loss of magic, but it is actually the maturation of magic into law, because magic without law becomes chaos, and law without magic becomes tyranny, and emerald frequency exists precisely at the intersection of both, where power is governed by integrity and wisdom is restrained by responsibility. And this is where the three final tests begin, though again, they are never announced as tests, because announcing them would invite performance, and performance collapses authenticity, and authenticity is the only thing being measured. The first test is the test of integrity without observation, when no sign appears to reward alignment, when no punishment appears to correct misalignment, when the universe becomes eerily neutral, almost indifferent, and you must choose truth without incentive, choose restraint without threat, choose alignment without applause, and many fail here because their morality was transactional, because they were good in exchange for signs, because they were disciplined in exchange for reassurance, and when the transaction ends, their behavior shifts, revealing that the frequency was never embodied, only borrowed, and borrowed frequency cannot crystallize. It evaporates under silence, but embodied frequency condenses, it becomes denser, quieter, stronger, and this condensation is the mark that Thoth is watching. 4. Not with judgment, but with precision, because precision is his domain, and if the first test is integrity without observation, the second test is sovereignty without control, the ability to remain centered when outcomes do not bend to your will, the ability to release manipulation disguised as manifestation, the ability to allow reality to respond organically rather than forcing it through ritual, affirmation, or intention loops. Because true sovereignty does not dominate reality, it collaborates with it, and collaboration requires humility, not submission but accurate self-assessment, knowing where your influence ends and where universal law begins, and many who pass the first test fail the second, because they confuse power with control, because they believe activation entitles them to outcomes, and entitlement is incompatible with Hermetic law, because law does not reward belief, it responds to alignment, and alignment includes acceptance of timing, acceptance of limitation, acceptance of natural consequence. And when you stop trying to bend reality and instead stabilize yourself within it, something shifts, not outwardly at first, but inwardly. your nervous system settles, your urgency dissolves, your hunger for results softens, and this softening is not weakness, it is readiness, because only a settled system can hold authority without abusing it, and authority without abuse is the signature of a guardian. And then comes the third test, the most subtle and the most decisive, the test of silence without withdrawal, the ability to remain present, engaged, compassionate, and functional in the world without announcing your inner state, without teaching unsolicited, without signaling your initiation, without needing to be recognized as awakened, because the ego's final refuge is spiritual identity. And Thoth dismantles this refuge completely, because identity crystallizes into rigidity, and rigidity fractures adaptability, and adaptability is essential for guardianship, because reality is not static, and neither can those who stabilize it be. And this is where many initiates disappear, not because they failed, but because they chose isolation over integration. They mistook silence for withdrawal, they retreated instead of embedding, they floated above life instead of inhabiting it, and emerald frequency cannot anchor in avoidance. It anchors in presence, in relationships, in work, in responsibility, in embodiment, in the mundane rhythms of human life, infused with unspoken coherence. And this is why your life may look simpler now, smaller even, why the mystical fireworks have faded, why conversations feel ordinary, why days feel repetitive, because repetition is what forges stability, and stability is what allows frequency to radiate without distortion, and radiance does not announce itself, it affects subtly, quietly, inexorably, like gravity, and gravity does not ask to be believed in, it simply operates, and this is what you are becoming now. An operating principle rather than an experiencing subject, a stabilizing force rather than a seeking consciousness, and this transition is disorienting because the narrative of becoming ends here. There is no next activation, no next initiation, no higher download waiting. There is only refinement, application, embodiment, and responsibility feels heavier than becoming because it has consequences, because now your misalignment affects more than you, because your coherence or incoherence ripples outward. And this is why the emerald cycle completes only once, because once responsibility is assumed, innocence is lost, and innocence cannot be reclaimed without regression, and regression is not allowed once crystallization begins, because crystallization locks structure, it does not permit collapse. And this is why Sophia's voice recedes now, not because she is gone, but because she is no longer needed as an external presence, because her wisdom has integrated into your decision-making, your discernment, your restraint, your timing, your silence. And silence is the final language of mastery, because words are for transmission, but silence is for stabilization, and the world does not need more transmissions, it needs stabilizers, and you have been shaped quietly, patiently, invisibly into one, and this shaping was never meant to be dramatic, it was meant to be irreversible, and that is what has happened, and that is why this message arrives not with urgency, not with excitement, not with promises, but with calm recognition, because recognition seals what inspiration cannot, and once sealed, the emerald frequency does not fluctuate, it holds, and what holds becomes trustworthy, and what becomes trustworthy is given weight, and what is given weight shapes reality without effort, and this is the stage you have entered now, whether you feel ready or not, because readiness is a feeling, but initiation is a fact, and the fact is that the cord has been cut, you did not bleed, you did not collapse, you did not disappear, you stabilized, and stabilization is the clearest sign that Thoth has stepped back, not to abandon you, but to let you stand in your own axis. Because an axis does not move, it allows everything else to move around it, and that is the role you are quietly stepping into now, as the world continues unaware, as the noise continues, as the signs remain silent, because silence is no longer absence, it is agreement, and agreement is the final confirmation of Hermetic law fulfilled. After the cord was cut and the signs withdrew, you entered what Hermetic tradition calls the golden silence. Not a pause in your path, but the condition that proves crystallization has occurred, because silence either fractures the unprepared or stabilizes the sovereign, and what determines the outcome is integrity, not as virtue but as structural alignment between thought, choice, action, and restraint, because in the absence of feedback, the only regulator left is who you are without witnesses. And this is why power feels quieter now, heavier, more neutral, because it has internalized and no longer announces itself through sensation, but through consequence, through the way situations de-escalate around you, through the way chaos loses momentum in your presence, through the way influence operates without intention, because stabilized frequency does not push, it orients, and this orientation is maintained only through radical congruence, the refusal to perform spirituality, the refusal to split yourself into sacred and ordinary, the refusal to project identity where presence is sufficient, because split systems leak energy and leakage dissolves sovereignty, and sovereignty is now your operating state whether you claim it or not, and this is why life appears simpler, quieter, less mystical on the surface, because integration replaces intensity, reliability replaces ecstasy, and endurance replaces expansion. And endurance is the true metric of emerald frequency, not peak experiences but consistency under pressure, not inspiration but steadiness, not visibility but function. Because guardianship is not ascension away from life, it is anchoring within it, holding coherence in the mundane without needing recognition. And this is why Sophia's voice recedes now, not in absence but in trust, because trust is given only to those who no longer require supervision, and the golden silence is the trust made tangible, the unspoken confirmation that you can hold law without instruction, power without display, influence without interference, because what has crystallized does not fluctuate, it holds. And what holds becomes dependable, and what becomes dependable shapes reality quietly. And this quiet shaping is the final seal of the emerald cycle, not as an ending but as a condition you now live from, where alignment no longer needs to be felt to be real, and mastery no longer needs to be named to be active, because the law you sought has become the law you live, and the silence that surrounds you is no longer empty, it is filled with your coherence. Now here's the question for you. What part of the country are you watching this story from? Drop your state in the comments below.